Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Betwixt the Books, discussed / after dark, both combined. Gretchen and I wanted to do a discussion for this week, but when this video is being posted, will be closing, so we couldn't do a live discussion. So instead, we're going to do a pre-recorded one. It's more or less probably going to be unedited unless I feel like there's something that I need to edit out, or if there's a very obvious need empty space. But most likely, this is just going to be us talking at each other, and then I'm going to post the video, which is the easiest form of video that we could do, barring actually live streaming. Today we wanted to talk about the enemies to lovers trope in romance. Now, again, most people know Gretchen reads way more romance than I do. I do read some romance, and I have been reading some more as of late. If you did not know, I more traditionally read paranormal romance. So most of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about does have the added caveat a lot of the time of them being immortal, which makes some things better and worse. When you can't die, you can be a lot meaner to each other. Just saying. But we wanted to talk about that today because I read a series of books this past week that I was like, wowza, was that aggressive? And to the point where I was like, how do you come back from this and make this a romance? You're telling me this is a romance, and I don't understand how two people can be like, yeah, the things that we've done to each other, it's all right, I can overlook that, we're in love now, all is well.
Well, and it was just so funny because, Michaela starts texting me about this series, and I was literally had just had a discussion with my fiance, and I was trying to explain to him the nuance of the enemies to lovers trope. And he's like, I am not your target audience for this. Please stop. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have to do a discussion about this. Because for anyone who hasn't watched my romance content, or my wrap-ups, it really shows when I get really stuck on a trope. And enemies to lovers is my, if I see that in a description, I'm like, yes. But that also means that I've read a lot of problematic stuff. And I think that there is definitely I don't know what the words are, but there's some different kinds of enemies to lovers, and we can talk about that today.
Do you want to give a rundown of what that is in case there is somebody watching who doesn't exactly know what that means?
Yeah. So, if you're not familiar with the romance genre in general, romance is so trope focused. It's kind of one of the main, and there's a difference, right, between a capital R romance and a lower R romance. And we're talking about capital R romance. Yes. And this is why, when you look at descriptions, they'll often use keywords. Stuff on Amazon sometimes at the bottom will tell you this is a fake fiance trope, this is a enemies to lovers trope.
There's only one bed.
There's only one bed. Yeah. So there's a lot of them, and many romances pick at least one, and that's the skeleton of their book. And all capital R romances also have happy endings. So that's why in an enemies to lovers romance, they have to become lovers.
Yes. And they have a happy ending.
And have a happy ending. So that's interesting in enemies to lovers because it is as it sounds. The two, the pair at the beginning, they start off diametrically opposed to each other in some way. And throughout the course of the novel, they learn that the other person is not as bad as either of them thought. They fall in love. Sometimes it's they just hate fuck until they've developed feelings, and sometimes it's a more the emotion comes first, and now they're and now I love you, let's bang. But it's just, I love this trope because I feel when it's done really well, it's funny normally, because normally there are hijinks that ensue in some way. They start, if they both work together in the same office, they start trying to pull pranks or sabotage the other person, hopefully in benign ways, but sometimes not. But normally a good setup for the most part is that they either have, like I said, diametrically opposed personalities and they have to learn to work with each other, or they don't like each other because of some crazy miscommunication. And it's a really wonderful like discussion on, you know, our first impressions of people are not always correct. And if we judge someone on that first impression, we could be missing a really great person if we just let a snap-second judgment cloud how we treat people. When not done well, it's pretty awful. But I love it when it's done well. I really do.
I think one of the things that I don't read romance as much as Gretchen does, but I do enjoy an enemies to lovers when it's done well. And I think part of that for me is because one of the things that Gretchen, I'm sure, has talked about with romances that is kind of comforting is that you know where it's going. There's like a formulaic sort of plot structure. So like over the generic plot in most romances is going to be one of a couple of things. And when it's enemies to lovers, one of the things that I like about it is that there usually isn't necessarily a betrayal towards the end of the book, whereas some romances where they are having a romance of some kind, somewhere in the middle to the third act, there's either a miscommunication or a betrayal that happens where they split apart before they come back together at the end, which for me is more painful than them being angry at the beginning and then slowly falling in love over the course of the whole thing without that sort of like broken piece in the middle, which for some people, again, would be more comforting. Like it's easier to watch two people fall in love than it is to watch them fall in love and then both become in pain because of whatever is happening. So there is that. I'll start with the books that I read. So hold on. Let me just real quick open up so that I'm saying the author correctly. I believe this series is called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. The author is Laura Thalassa. It is a Kindle Unlimited series. So if you have Kindle Unlimited and want to read it, go for it. I didn't hate them. I enjoyed them. I read them all in one sitting. Like it was one of those ones where I was like, num, 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 num. But I texted Gretchen after reading the first one because the book literally opens with the female lead shooting the male love interest in the chest twice with a shotgun. And then while he is still alive, lighting him on fire. And he literally begs her, like he's like, please, because he can feel pain. He can't die. He's immortal, but he can feel pain, and that sucks. And then in retaliation for that, because that's rough, he ties her to a rope and ties the other end of the rope to his horse and makes her run behind him, which, as you would expect, eventually she's going to trip and fall and get dragged behind him as on his horse. And like his reaction is, oh no, you're hurt. I didn't realize that would hurt you. And I'm like, did you not like did you not realize that might harm her? She's not immortal like you are. She is a human. And like this is the beginning of it. And my reaction to that was, how do you fall in love after you have done these things to each other? Because there's a certain amount of pain that is inflicted on people that you cannot come back from. And personally, being lit on fire while alive is probably a line that can't be crossed again. It's not even that it was abusive. It's just too much.
And so the book that, I mean, I almost feel bad naming the book that had set off this conversation for me, because I feel like there is an unfortunate number of enemies to lovers that have an issue with the concept of irredeemability. And I think that's a major thing on like the spectrum of enemies to lovers that we're kind of talking about. Maybe spectrum is the wrong word. There's different categories. And there are books that are like, I read mostly contemporary, some historical. I was bigger into historical at the beginning of my romance binge than I am now. But I do also read fantasy and paranormal at times. But I think either way, you know, there are enemies to lovers where, like I said, it's a miscommunication. It's something, and like, you know, they, as decent humans would, and when forced to have to work together towards some goal, whether it's in the office or to save the world, whatever it is, you know, they come to learn more about each other, fall in love. Okay, fine, cool. That's like a category. Then there is a category where, you know, all romance is to a certain extent a fantasy, you know. So there are definitely books that, like, I don't want to pigeonhole this, but especially in the predominant romance are hetero. There's a guy and a girl. And there is several subsections that are very obsessed with, like, the guy is an assassin, he's a mafioso, he, you know, he's dark, he's a mass murderer.
Gotta love the tall, dark, handsome bad boy.
Yeah, and they really are irredeemable, and they treat their partner terribly. But they, you know, end up in a relationship, and I feel like that's like someone has committed to that. And while I do feel like there are probably still people who take that as like realistic, you know, those books aren't trying to say like this guy like could realistically should be seen as like redeemable. Like he's not, but like she just loves him anyway, right? And or he, you know, finds a soft spot for her, and that's a whole other thing. But there are these really scary books in the middle that tell you the entire time that one person's terrible actions are redeemable, and you're reading it and you're like, no, do not forgive. And that was the kind of book that I had just finished, and I was trying to explain these categories to my fiance, and he was like,
It feels like when you're a little kid and you're like, a guy is mean to you at school, so your mom's like, oh, it's because he likes you. Like it feels like that sort of apology for bad behavior. He's only doing that because he likes you, and it's like, if he liked me, he shouldn't be doing that.
This is, I mean, I feel like it just goes back to, you know, because this is, I mean, not to really expand the discussion for a second, but this is, I mean, we talked about this when we talked about Holly Black's Cruel Prince, because that was also a relationship where you're supposed to ship them, but like he keeps treating her so awfully, and you're like, I don't ship it. And I think what really drove me insane about the book that I was reading is that a lot of times, like really basic romances, like there's like the guy and the girl in like a stereotypical book that I am talking about, and like there are other characters, but they don't really factor in. But in this particular one, there was a sister, and every time like the guy, he would like yell at her or really like tear her down or treat her poorly, and she would go back to her sister and be like really upset about it, and her sister would be like, well, you have to see it from his perspective. And I feel like the point there was that, like, trying to say everyone has emotions, right? And we all lash out at people, and sometimes we hurt people without meaning to. But what was coming out of all those interactions was that it didn't matter that he had hurt her because he had a reason. And I was like, no. It's the shattered plate analogy, right? Like if you hurt someone, you have still shattered the plate. Yeah. Just because you say you're sorry doesn't mean that hurt has not been done.
Yeah.
And like I was telling Michaela before this started, the one time that the female lead stands up for herself and says, no, he hurt me, and her sister goes, okay, yeah, I know, I totally get it, you're right. The female lead goes back to talk to the guy, and he like apologizes with a proposal, and she says yes. And I'm like, oh my God, no. Just stop.
It's not an apology.
No, but like, so here's, I think, the thing that gets me about these books is that I don't think that the authors are ever doing it maliciously.
No.
Right? Like, I'm not saying that these people are like packaging toxicity for funsies. But like, that's what really gets me about this book, is that I genuinely believe someone thinks they have written a beautiful, redeemable romance. And you're like, whoa.
And I would say that I am far more lenient with adult romances that do this than I am with young adult books that do this. And again, most young adult books have strong romance elements, but they're not like hard R romance always. But like, my issue with The Cruel Prince, because the target audience is young people who do not have life experience, if you, the author, are writing this book where these horrible actions are being done, and you're writing it clearly with the view of, this is something that people want, like, you are supposed to ship it, you are supposed to want them to be together, you are in some way enforcing in the readers, in this case it would have been children, teenagers, but children, that this is okay, that this sort of relationship is something to want, that it is something to, because it is a fantasy, right? Like, in the same way that a lot of books that men read are power fantasies, for women, romances or romance elements are another type of fantasy of like, God, wouldn't it be great to have this swoon worthy romance? It would just be so awesome. None of us get to have that, but like, it would be so cool to have it. And when you create this for children, it feels morally wrong. Like,
well, and like, I mean, if this was a blog post, and I think a really long time ago I made a video about it too, but you know, when I was a teen, I read Grave Mercy by R.L. Lefevre's, and this is when I was still like text blogging, and so on my blog there is a 5-star written review of this book, which was a YA historical-ish fantasy. And in there are words like, the romance is realistic, you know, she's a really strong character. Again, 5 stars. And I have always been like, I don't give those out, like, you know. And I went back to that book for my undergraduate thesis on female assassins in young adult literature. And just the space of, let's say, 4 years that I had been at that time, I was like, holy butts. Like, I mean, literally, like, he explicitly says that her fear turns him on. Like, she is genuinely afraid of the guy that is her love interest. And I'm just like, you know, me thinking I'm a smarty smart, you know, teen, totally saw this as like a 5-star worthy romance, and it's like the most toxic thing I've ever read. But I still really argue to a certain extent, though, that putting, like, I would hope that adult readers are more discerning.
Yeah,
but the thing is,
not necessarily.
It's not. And I also feel like, you know, it's, people talk about how, like, you know, people in like long happy relationships read romance novels same as single people, and so like single people can be saying, oh, that's my fantasy, when it's like super toxic as hell. But also, like, you know, I feel like a lot of this media teaches us that like relationships need to have a lot of drama to be like interesting or passionate, and like, I don't want that kind of drama in my life.
Not in my real life. No, thank you.
Not in my real life. No, thank you. But I'm just like, that's what concerns me, is that like, if you read enough of it, like no matter what age you are, it starts to feel like something that
is enviable, something that you would
is
like.
enviable, or just straight up okay.
Yeah.
It just makes me cranky.
Yeah. Most of the time, I think that one of the things that also can be problematic here. And you have talked about your dislike of it at times in different books that you've read as well, is the idea that love can fix anything, which is also a huge thing in some enemies to lovers. There is like a camp of enemies to lovers where like the one person is really irredeemable, and the thing that makes them redeemable is that they have fallen in love, which was the case of my books that I read here. Again, they're the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They're on earth to kill everybody. So while they are mean to their love interests in some of these books, not all of them, they're more mean to just other people, and for the most part they don't like harming their love interests because they're the love interest. Or at least that they get to a point at some point in the book where they don't like harming their love interest. But the idea of the book is that all of them have to ride across the world killing everybody. And at the end of it, they need to decide whether humanity is worth saving or not. And the way that they decide that is simply by falling in love. Like, I fall in love with the woman. They are worth saving. Never mind. I'll stop killing. I see it. Yeah, it's okay.
If I keep killing them all, I'll never have sex again.
I won't have a vagina to enjoy.
And I mean, I would still argue that I feel like those books, and again, I've not read them, so I can't like firmly stand on this hill, but I would argue that those are in that class of enemies to lovers where like there is a fantasy of the guy who is awful to everyone but you. And to you, he reveals his heart of gold, He's
actually sweet inside there.
Yeah. And like, cause like there's something really special about like, you're the only person in the world that gets to see this side of this person. And also, I mean, I do feel like there is often in a lot of that trope, like a lot of toxic masculinity, because the point is that like, they can't be anything but a powerful mafia boss, or whatever, in real life. Because they would get murdered by their rival or something. And so that's a whole other thing. But again, just this idea of like the level of irredeemability we are supposed to realistically accept, which just I had a larger point, but I lost it. So
it's hard. I am a reader who enjoys morally gray characters. Like there's been books that aren't romances at all where like some of the side characters that are kind of awful, I'm like, I just really wanted them to learn to be better. Like they're broken and I want them to be better. Like I am a reader who enjoys that. So I can totally empathize with the authors who are doing this because it is a thing that I like. I talk about, it's not romance, but I talk about Joe Hill a lot as one of my favorite horror authors because he focuses a lot on moral ambiguity and that there are people who are doing really awful things, but in their mind, they have justified it. And can you, a reasonable person, look into this person's mind and see how they could come to that conclusion and deem it as like, okay, I can kind of follow your logic. So if we're talking about these four horsemen, the last book is Death, and Death is the only one who I think his like blind killing was actually redeemed in that he is Death. It is his job in this. He's kind of Thanatos. It's his job to ferry the dead to their afterlife. He knows that every single person who dies is going to be taken from earth and brought to heaven. There is no hell. They get brought to heaven. They are greeted by their loved ones. There is no more suffering. There is no more pain. There is nothing else there. It is peace and happiness. And that is what comes after. So he's riding through the land, killing everybody because he's been told to do it. But he knows, and his way of killing is literally like snap and they all drop dead. Like there's no pain, there's no suffering. They're just dead. And he's taking them to peacefulness. And I'm like, this is the only one who I can realistically say, like, you're killing thousands, millions of people going across this world, and I don't feel like that's an awful thing.
Yeah.
Like, the only one who was redeemable, and it was simply because there was no torture, there was no violence, it was just, they die. And it's sad, and he says he doesn't like doing it. He doesn't like taking people before they're ready. Turn around and look at Famine. My guy was having people stabbed 37 times in the chest and thrown in a giant open pit together. like very aggressive.
Now listen, I don't want to come out as like some moral pillar of rectitude and be like, there are some people who can't be redeemed, because like, I mean, again, I feel like it's in the writing, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, if you enjoy causing people this pain,
Yeah.
but like, you know, like you said, like with death, like if there's a reason or if there's a backstory, like I'm not going to say like this doesn't work. And I also don't mean to like belittle anyone who enjoys that kind of thing, because that's, I mean, trust me, I have gone down the mafia hole a few times. Like I have hit that. But I just, and that's, I mean, why I'm fine with them, because when I read them, I'm not expected to think that like, you know, it's not, but I will say, I think this just really goes back to the fact that capital R romance has to end with them together. And to a certain extent, I'm like, just for the sake of drama, if you know that these characters have to end up together, maybe you shouldn't have let them do that thing to each other, author.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if we all know where this is going, and I have definitely been reading books where I like read something that the characters do to each other, and like there's no secret. Like I know that they are gonna have to come back from this and get together, and I'm just sitting there like, I don't even know if I want to finish this book. And then I think, well, that's not fair to the author. Maybe they'll make it work. But like 9 times out of 10, if it's like that drastic, and I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah.
And it's just like, why don't make them do irredeemable things to each other when they have to be redeemed by the end.
I think the only thing that has ever made me actually be like, I don't think there's any way to come back from this. Even lighting a man on fire while he is alive. I was like, he's a horseman of the apocalypse. He's killing everyone. I get it. You're trying to stop him. He shot him twice in the chest. He wasn't dead. You were trying to kill him. I get it. I understand. but it is the hard R rape, which I have had books where that happened in the beginning, and they're supposed to fall in love and be happy at the end. And I was like, no.
So true story. When I was about 12, I was going to a family wedding with my aunt, my grandmother, and my grandmother's partner. And I was not a quiet child. And so my aunt gave me some of her books to read in the car. We were driving like a couple of states away. And that was how I found out how sex works, because she had romance novels in the car. And the first one, and I couldn't tell you what the book was, but I remember bits and pieces of the cover. But I expressly remember the storyline because the opening is, it's like, he's a Cossack, I think. So it like takes that place out in like Siberia or something. And it's like 10 years before the full events of the story. And the guy comes across the girl, main character, on the steps. He rapes her. And then you cut to 10 years later, and that's their story of him being redeemed and them getting together. But also, like, she hasn't been able to form any other romantic relationships in this time because she is no longer pure. And that was one of the first romance novels that I read. And I remember thinking, like, I'm 12 and I'm dumb and I don't really understand what all these words mean. But I was like, I put that book down and I just felt gross.
Yeah.
And really, I feel like that experience is one of the reasons that I didn't pick up romance novels for a really long time. Because I was like, if this is what is in them, I don't want to go anywhere near them. So that's the other thing too, even though that book is explicitly written for adults and you wouldn't necessarily like, you know, my aunt just like threw a pile of books at me. And so like, just because it's like an adult romance doesn't mean that someone younger is not going to get their hands on it.
Access to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had no one to talk to about that, you know?
Yeah.
I knew I felt like I had done something wrong by reading an explicit sex book, and I wasn't going to go talk to my family about it. I was like, this is romance? Like,
romance.
because that was like an enemies to lovers, book. And I still can't think about that book without feeling really, really gross.
Yeah, it's not, I don't excuse that in books that aren't romance. Anytime that it pops up, I feel like it's too much. Like I can stand lighting a man on fire. I cannot stand rape in any context. There is no reason for it. It is too much. It is too far.
Well, and like I feel like, in your, again, I've not read your books, but I feel like in a lot of paranormal or even fantasy books, they start out trying to literally kill each other.
Yes.
Because, one is a vampire and one is a vampire hunter.
Yes.
But what that turns into is an allegory for like, just because they're two different species doesn't mean that they can't.
It's usually a miscommunication thing of like, you kill us, you're a monster, and I am trying to protect my people. Like there's like a logical thing, and this is either I don't enjoy doing that, but I have to survive. Like this, like if a cows suddenly turned around and started stabbing you because you eat them, like how would you feel about that?
Yeah.
Like it's not, but it's you have to. Like,
yeah. But I feel like that's very easily redeemable. Like, yeah, yes. I absolutely get that. And it becomes kind of as in a miscommunication. Like, yes. We didn't stop to think about these people in a humanistic context. And now we realize that there's no reason for this violence. It's normally how those go.
The other thing, and in the way that you like enemies to lovers, I really like fated mates. When you put those together, when you take these things and you make them the same thing, that's where things get wild.
Well, and I think too, I was thinking about this a couple of points back, was also just that like, so I can't really even watch like sitcoms because I get a really, really bad secondhand anxiety. So I think also like one of the things about enemies to lovers is that, when they start doing these hijinky things, there's a funny prank, but there's also some of them where, and again, I don't mean to stereotype this, but it generally is, the guy goes too far with the girl and ends up like really embarrassing her. And that's, someone else might be able to go like, oof, that's rough, buddy, and then like keep going. But for me, because that's like such a massive thing for like, for me, I don't think that if someone like maliciously and purposefully embarrasses you, that you should then turn around and bang them. I don't think that at all. But like, no. I have a really low tolerance for that. And that's more common, I think, too. Yeah. The prank goes too far or something.
I've seen that where it's like, it's this thing of like different people have different levels of what is acceptable. and like there is the thing of like we've been joking, why isn't this funny anymore? Like when did it stop being funny? And
but again, I will hold on to this, that like there is definitely like I'm fine with it when like someone sets up a prank and then it goes like it ends up much bigger than it was intended. Yes. Right.
And an accidental increase versus a like, purposeful malicious increase.
Yeah. And then for the size of it, for the guy to not realize that would be like
too much.
Yeah, you can write your way out of that corner, but for me, I'm like, if they are this emotionally unintelligent, like, although I will say that oftentimes when that happens, I also feel like there are class things involved too, because so many of these are very classist. And like oftentimes, you know, the guy is a billionaire and she works for him, or there's like some power dynamic that's weird.
Yeah.
But when Michaela and I were doing this, our pre-discussion, I was trying to think of like, I can think of times when the guy has been the aggressor. I can think of, obviously, I mean, enemies to lovers works the best when they're both aggressors, or combatants, or I don't know. But like, I could only think of one book where the female character was the aggressor, and that was shipped by Angie Hockman, and that was like a total miscommunication of two people who have been working remotely, and through literal miscommunication, she doesn't like him and he doesn't realize that like he's been misheard. So when they finally meet in person and she's like, I hate your guts, and he's like, I am so confused now.
What happened?
And she finds out that she's literally just like boxing a straw man, and he's like literally cluelessly just like, I don't know how to fix this, I don't know what is broken.
What did I do?
But you know, he doesn't take the bait. He just sits there and he's like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel like oftentimes like the extra power and balance, I like really hate. And then he's like, well, I didn't think that it would go that poorly for you. And she's like, well, they found out I was like banging the boss. Like, of course, that's not a good look for a woman trying to have her own career. And they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. And you're like,
you didn't think about it, huh? You idiot.
I am so tired. I'm like, Kindle Unlimited is full of so many billionaire books to the point where sometimes I feel like I can't, like, I have to read one of them just to make it go away from my recommendations list. But I'm like, okay. And they work together and it's a secret. And I'm just like, make it stop.
Yes.
Give me a billionaire lady.
Give me a billionaire lady. She has all the power. Swap the power imbalance.
Literally, if anyone has made it this far into this video and they can think of one where the girl is the billionaire and the guy is not, or like any like non-hetero version of this, I will happily take that recommendation, because there is literally nothing that drives me more insane than this repetitive nonsense. I want to see a lady baller. That's what I want.
I mean, I don't think I have any that are specifically enemies to lovers where the woman is more of the aggressor, but at least in most of my paranormal ones, the women are for sure badasses. If they are not themselves like insanely like powerful and strong and doing whatever they're doing on their own, like their force of will is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's maybe I need to read more paranormal romance, but I
There's
just like
a lot less power imbalance, and I think that's why I prefer them. Is I get uncomfortable when I read. I can't read the billionaire ones because it makes the power imbalance makes me too uncomfortable. I will wait. Basically, I'm saying I will read people harming each other, which is that I can't deal with power imbalance.
I just normally I'm just like, oh my god, I'm on page 3 of you explaining this world. Just kiss.
Just kiss already. Oh,
I don't care about this world building. I'm not here for this. If I wanted this, I would have read an actual fantasy book. Just bang.
That's all you wanted.
I really do feel like I read romance novels for the interpersonal interaction.
Yeah.
And so I just like when it goes even just a little bit poorly, I am disappointed, because I just like, I love watching people fall in love.
Yeah.
And my favorite relationships are, you know, there's more stuff going on. Like it's an understanding that, you know, a romance novel just doesn't have to be two people wanting to bang. Like they are two individual people with two very rich and complicated lives. They cannot save each other, but they can support each other.
Yeah.
Through that. And that is so difficult to find. Sometimes it feels. I mean, I'm also wading in the very, very deep end of Kindle Unlimited sometimes. But just because they're there doesn't mean they're bad books,
No.
you know.
No, for sure not. I'm sure we've both read ones that we've enjoyed that are Kindle Unlimited.
Oh, totally.
But like, it's just that it's easier to self-publish sometimes than it is to try and deal with publishing world and having other hands in your pot.
Well, in the publishing world, like the ones that do get published, the reason that I stopped reading as many of them says like, oh, all of these also feel the same.
Yeah.
Like there was like, this is the tenor of the thing that is acceptable to be published and be popular.
Yes.
And so that was why I started reading, more Kindle Unlimited, because they're a little bit more interesting sometimes, or they're a little bit more, of course, when we did Yours Insatiably, that was too far for me. I discovered there is a limit to how far I'm willing to go.
That video isn't up yet, but we did do a review of a monster romance that I like 5-star read for me. Gretchen didn't enjoy it, but that's okay. I will say though that I saw a Betwixt tweet that her local library rejected to take a copy from her, like not even buy it, to take a copy to put in their collection because her trigger warnings at the front. They thought it was not acceptable to be in their collection, and I was like, ooh, interesting choices.
Well, I mean, this is a whole other video, but I mean, also libraries really being targeted right now with challenges, and so I can imagine that maybe in a less volatile climate, like also it depends on the community of the library, but this is just like a really volatile time for libraries to just have like something with a gay couple. I mean, people challenge Tango Takes Two, and that is a children's picture book about gay penguins. So I will say, have patience. We are, as librarians, are concerned on a daily basis that, someone's going to choose to fight their fight in our stacks. When, the point of the library is to have all sides represented. Like, I mean, you can tell from my political books, I lean Democrat, but I buy the 900s and biographies. And, if it's popular, I don't have to agree with it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
A library is an institution of free speech.
Yeah. That's why it surprised me more so than anything else, was like, your job isn't to censor people. You are a librarian. Your job is to help with voicelessness. You're supposed to do the opposite of that, but okay, I see you. Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, it's a tough
time.
Sometimes there are no right answers also. Yeah. But I mean, that book was something.
I enjoyed it. I am enjoying Evaded Vice's work. I will continue to read.
And I don't want that my face to be like, it was a bad book. I'm not saying it was a bad book. I'm not trying to kink shame. Obviously, like Michaela and I discussed it. I understand why she liked it. But I have been reading so much romance that I genuinely thought I had become unshockable to a certain extent. And like, cause I've read some stuff where I'm like, oh no, that's not my kink. But I was like, there's tentacle, and now there's a tentacle, and
monster romance.
Yeah, that was my first one, and
it is
we are so off topic. You realize we've just
I was about to say, it's not for everyone. It's fine. Yeah. It's okay. There's tropes in everywhere. That's not for everyone. And I completely understand it. Again, keep in mind that me as a reader, I am asexual and all sex scenes make me uncomfortable to some extent. So I can read something that's a little bit wilder in the sexual department because it is the same level of uncomfortability.
I mean, I will say that most sex scenes in romance novels are like, oh my God, you're so big. Will you fit? This is the best sex of my life. 4th orgasm incoming. And you're like, uh-huh. I mean, as someone who is like just boring straight person, sometimes I'm like, okay, we're just gonna
yucky
Just
But
talk
enemies
more
to
about,
lovers, though. Interesting trope.
yeah. Well, I mean, if you've made it to this point in the video, I mean, clearly it's just tropes are really fun to talk about. And also every reader, I mean, the reason so many of them exist is that readers will come to them from different angles. And like sometimes that's what you want, and sometimes it's not what you not want. And I really enjoy that romance is very explicit about what tropes are in them. Because, like, for an example, I do not like secret child romances. That's not my gig. And they're like, again, this has this in it. And I have a very short temper with the fake fiance trope. And here's what's in it. I love second chance romances, and I can find them really easily. But I will say that once you start to read a lot of them, you just start to question, like, is this a good part of this trope? You know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I just feel like genuinely someone thinks that that behavior is romantic, and it's not.
And it's not. Do you want to, since we've been talking about some of the poor examples of enemies to lovers, do you want to talk about some of the ones that, or like to give some recommendations of ones that you did like? Because I feel like we've only talked about the ones that we didn't really like.
Yeah. So I would recommend Shipped by Angie Hockman. That one is very cute, and it takes place mostly on a cruise ship, which I think is part of like the Pop Sugar Reading Challenge this year. And it has also they end up on the Galapagos Islands, and there's a ecological preservation bit with like nonfiction back matter at the end of it, which was really fun. I will stand completely and forever. You Deserve Each Other by Sarah Hogel. This is it blurs the line between second chance and enemies to lovers. I would classify it more as enemies to lovers because it's two people who are engaged to be married, but the premise is really they just discover in planning their wedding that they don't really know each other, and that their relationship has really just been surface level and acting things out. So they don't really have like a history as opposed to like a fake persona that they have to bust through. But that is one of the funniest books I've ever read. I love that book so much. The Hating Game is one that has also, I think, has been made into a movie. Shoot, I forgot who wrote that. Oh my god, it'll come back to me. It's on like a bunch of recommendation lists, but I really liked that one.
Sally Thorne,
thank you. And so when are we posting this?
Next Friday.
So if I have my act together for Valentine's Day, I'm making a 5-star romance recommendations video where I'm going to talk about like my top 5-star romances in a couple of genres. So there's going to be more in there that I'm sure I'll be able to think of. But one of the spiciest enemies to lovers that I think I've ever read is Beautiful Bastard by Christina Lauren. And that one, I was reading it at work, and I was sharing an office with someone at the time. And I think I literally made it like 5 pages in, and they were already having hate sex in a stairwell. And I remember looking at my office mate and going, because she also reads romances, and I was like, this is 5 pages in and they're banging in the stairwell. And she was like, was there any plot? Did they just start banging? And I was like,
cold open.
Actually, yeah, but it was actually that entire series is actually quite goodness, very spicy, obviously. But so off the top of my head, those are some recommendations. But you can check out the other video. And then my top 5 of 2021 was also very romance heavy. I do a lot of romance all the time when I'm not talking about American politics.
I guess for me, because I'm non-traditional and I haven't read as many, I don't have as many recommendations for you, but I will say that Laurel K. Hamilton's Anita Blake series, which is technically an urban fantasy series and not just a romance, does have enemies to lovers in there, and that is a vampire and a vampire hunter. It is also poly and involves other tropes and relationships as well, and it also has BDSM elements, so if you're not okay with that stuff, don't maybe read those, but I enjoyed it, and that does have that. So if you're looking for that, again, I complained about them, but I enjoyed the hell out of them. The Four Horsemen books were not terrible. They were just very aggressive. So if you're okay with some very aggressive violence and a fated mates thing, like, go for it, do it. It's good. I enjoyed it. It was a good time. I would say that to an extent, I think Sorcery of Thorns had a little bit of an enemies to lovers thing, mostly just a we were raised in completely different worlds type thing, and so I think that what you're doing is evil, and need the love interest needing to be taught basically that what she thought was evil is not actually evil, and I enjoyed that more so than like actual like angry enemies. They weren't mad at each other, they weren't fighting each other necessarily. It was more of just like a we are diametrically opposed in our ideals type of thing.
Oh, and I feel like I should throw a bone to you know, if you're looking for like the dark billionaire dark mafioso, there's one series in which the opening scene is that the girl has been kidnapped by an associate of one of the guys, and he's like, oh my god, how am I going to undo this? The books I've read basically every book Megan March has ever written. Because I'm like super obsessed with how fun her writing style is, and that's like a recommendation if you want to go down that road. Some of them are she definitely does have some cinnamon bun, you know, main character, so you're like, I love you guys, but some of them are on the darker side, but they're quite good.
Oh, the only other one that I wanted to say was Able by Katie Robert. That's it's not entirely a mafia thing. It sort of has that feeling where it's set in a city where like different factions have control over different areas of the city, but that one is a triad where one member, they used to be best friends, then one of them betrayed the other one, and now he's back for his revenge, and he's taking the other one's wife at the same time. So it's gonna become a threesome. It was an interesting choice. So ex-friends to enemies, friends to enemies to lovers. I don't know.
You get the whole gambit there.
Spectrum. That's my only other one. It's fun. We were complaining about it, but it is fun. It's a hard trope to pull off, and there's a lot of ways you can do it wrong, but it can be really fun and enjoyable. And so if you have recommendations for us, by all means, leave it down below, because obviously we read and enjoy them. Or if there's another trope that you want us to like sort of read and talk about, you can let us know about that as well, because we would probably be super willing to do that as well. And we will talk to you again soon about stuff. At some point, we will maybe perhaps read Iron Widow. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe one day. Is it soon? Maybe. Is it tomorrow? Probably not. We'll talk to you again soon, guys. Bye.